I played this game and filmed this review on this table from Game Theory Tables, our good friends who are also today's sponsor. The reason we decided to partner with GTT is not only for their gorgeous board game tables, which make game night memorable, but like us, they want to bring the love of board gaming to as many people as possible. We personally met up with the GTT team, and if you use our link to get your own table, it directly supports our channel's ability to make content for you. The holidays are coming up, and they have some great offers. Remember to use the code SHELFSIDE for a free layout. It is time for spooky games with Final Girl, where you play in a campy horror movie playing as, well, this final girl right here. Or this final girl. Or this final girl. Or this final girl. Or this final girl. In Final Girl, there's a big bad killer terrorizing everyone, and it's your job to kill it before it kills you. And before it kills too many fellow humans all running around in panic. In practice, you're controlling a unique girl, playing cards from hand as actions, rolling dice to see if they succeed, and occasionally attacking the bad guy with attack cards when you share space with him. Oh, you'll also need to rescue the victims running around. One other thing, Final Girl is an entirely modular experience where you buy the core set and then combine it with one of these feature film boxes to play. For this review, I played these 3 on screen, which one of is from the starter set. So analysis of that bundle set is lumped into this review. Here are all my plays, I'll put them all on screen. In total, this is 12 games. Final Girl has really sprung on my radar for seeing it super hyped and seeing it shoot through the BGG ratings. So with the third wave going through its recent very successful campaign, I had to take a look at this purely solo 20 to 60 minute game. So let's see if the hype is real. How to play. Goal is to kill bad guy. If you die, you lose. Oh yeah, for the sake of this part, we'll use the simplest killer, Hans. So how do you kill him? Well, on each of your turns, you can play as many cards as you want from your hand. When you play one, you'll do a dice roll and see how many successes you roll. Then you just see what outcome you get. If you get a partial success, you can discard 2 cards from hand to make it a success. Sometimes after actions, you'll move down time, which is a resource. Note that landing attacks while you're next to a killer is the main way to do damage. This is also a horror-styled game, so there's horror that affects you. It's basically how many dice you roll per check. It generally goes up from the killer killing victims that panic around the map and need to be rescued, and horror goes down through certain cards. Your turn ends when you don't want to play more cards or are forced to end your turn. All cards you are played stayed in one pile, then you look at your remaining time and buy any amount of other cards. You'll get back the cards you just played at the end of the next turn. Yes, 0 cost cards are free to buy. Then it's the killer's turn. He'll first attack whatever is on his space. Then you flip the top tarot card and see what it does. Usually it'll involve some combination of moving and attacking, but it can also give minor dark powers, which are like passives. When there's no more tarot cards left, the killer will unleash his final form. Unleashing, getting to do terrible things that revolve around, he's just gonna run you down and smash your head in ASAP. Remember these helpless victims? Every time a victim dies, Hans may have his attack and movement get stronger. He can eventually get a dark power passive. So you want to save victims by leading them to exit spaces. Whenever you save one, you put it on your Final Girl card and get the benefit. Once you fill in your entire card, you flip it over for a permanent new ability. Basically, this is a kill or be killed game, where every turn you play cards from hand, roll a die to see if they succeed or not, try to save victims, then the killer does something bad on their turn with a terror card. Again, this is super bare bones for the simplest killer, so much more information in the pros. For component pros, we've seen a lot of different games, and it's pretty rare that packaging will stand out so much to us. Starting with the outside of the box, they look like VHS tapes, which is really cool for that horror movie shtick. Then, when you want to open it, it comes apart magnetically. Magnets. That's right, all the boards you need to play the game with attach via magnets to the box. This is a fun way to move the boards and also saves a little bit of space in the box. Once more, there's a super clear division for the feature film boxes where you can put the killer on one side of the lids, then flip the box over, then put in the location stuff. Oh yeah, we also want to point out that everything in this game has an insert or plastic bag included. Said pieces are also great. You get big chunky dice, great wooden pieces for meeples, health, and even a wooden time token. The art is also just awesome. I know the Camp Happy Trails color palette is a little bit more muted, but if you get this Frightmare one, some of Freddy's cards are gorgeous. You got the full art killer boards, and even when you're touching the cover of the boxes and flipping them over, you feel so immersed into this gritty, campy horror. Good job, Ronald McDonald, on the art. And the symbology is also incredible, as there's so many symbols that just make immediate sense. Partial success, need 2 more cards. That's what it says. Blood splat? Oh yeah, that's bloodlust going up. Targeting you? Yep, that's the meeple with the long hair. The killer moves? terrifying huge boot that looks like you're being run down. 0 time cost for a card, it has an orange to make it stand out. Special cards are also different colors, which is nice to distinguish them. Like, this is not a physically large game, but there's a lot of little things to keep track of, especially with 3 different boards, and when you're going between it all, it's pretty easy to still keep track of what's going on. Speaking about easy to understand, the main rulebook is very clear, with plenty of visuals, examples, and an index. Everything made complete sense while going through it, and the back is an amazing quick reference. This gets us right into how this game does modularity, because remember how we said you can mix and match killers and locations? Well, you got a rulebook for each of them inside of the smaller boxes. 1 box, 2 rulebooks, and then you can later mix and match them. That's really awesome. Plus, things are very clearly labeled as being part of their set, and when they can, the symbol is on the back of the card. This makes separating these a breeze for when you'll want to inevitably start spawning killers outside of their canon location. Okay, last component-ish thing I promise is the flavor text. There's a brief backstory on every rulebook, which makes sense regardless of what combinations of pieces you use, and then most cards have flavor text. I mean, there's a lot of cards in this game, so that's a bunch of flavor text. Whether it just be your basic actions, or the more critical ones, or items, there's a little blurb to read. Campy goodness. Gameplay pros time. So before we get into the different girls and killers and locations, we have to praise the core of this game, which is the hand management. See, you start with 4 different actions and 6 cards, and you have to think that every time you play a card, you won't have it for next turn, but you can use any remaining time you have to buy any of these cards here. This is hand building, where you're constantly planning ahead, seeing what are crucial cards you need to buy for future turns. Do you have a slower turn now with less time used? And then try to buy a bunch of movement and search cards for next turn to save a bunch of victims? Note that you cannot move without movement cards, so make sure you have those lest you get trapped. Is it worth discarding 2 cards, maybe even one that you paid for, to succeed your current roll? And there's awesome flexibility of ditching any cards you want for +1 time for each. That is so useful. Plus, you cannot simply stockpile the strongest cards to wait for late game, because there's only 1 copy of each, namely the attacks, so you have to find the best ways to cycle their play to buy them again and again to win. There's 11 unique types of cards to buy that all have their own merit of buying, from boosting your next roll or re-rolling. This cheap one is also nice discard fodder. Certain maps also have their own cards for more cool interactions. We'll talk about these a little later. The cards will also help you manage the different tracks in this game. So let's start here with horror. So if the horror is at 6, that's in a really scary spot, because if it goes any higher, you're only down to 1 die. You're kind of SOL with just 1 die, so you want to stay closer to the 1 here, which lets you get 3 dice if you unlock it. Also, hear this, it's good to almost die. You get an additional die roll if you're at this critical state, but of course any hit could kill you, so you gotta be mentally locked in while in this state, positioning away from the killer, getting plenty of guard cards, and having your rest close at hand. So ideally, you want to have time high to buy more cards, terror low to keep rolling lots of dice, and health either super high or at 1. And it's here we really want to praise how they handle the victims in this game. First of all, as an idea, they give the game so much more flavor than just you and the killer running around. Then they're integrated very seamlessly. Saving them provides nice benefits, them dying buffs the killer, and if the map is devoid of them, some terror cards will punish you. Event cards also frequently make victims actual NPCs, giving you perks for interacting with them and punishing you much harder if they die. One cool victim mechanic is the panicking they do at the end of rounds, where if any victim died that turn, they all panic on the board and move completely randomly. Not only is this hilarious to see people running in terror, conveniently moving away from safety here, turn up so many different stories and you can see, oh, maybe victims are really smart by panicking to safety conveniently, or they're really dumb and panic towards death. For the next gameplay pro, we want to talk about the great progression here that is packed into a sub-hour game. So you start with nothing or next to nothing, and it's your job to grab items and other things, but you also need to balance that with saving victims before they die on you. And then the benefits giving you these free injections of stuff is pretty cool for some turns. You can usually get at least 2 of these filled out on turns because you can carry 2 victims with you. Like, look at that, getting to move for free. That's really cool in a game like this where you otherwise had to roll a check for it. It kind of feels like sneaking in your own food to a horror movie theater. You also want to find ways to roll more dice for every check. And as covered, if you manage your checks correctly, you can easily roll 4 or 5 dice endgame. While it's not the most common thing, it's cool that if the killer is at 1 HP, you roll an extra die to get that final satisfying momentum in your roll to close out the game. For the cards, you ideally want to get a better attack, and make sure that that hits with the check modifier cards. And you can get those cards from saving victims sometimes. When the killer reveals their final terror card, the randomness jig lets up a lot, where the game becomes a no-nonsense manhunt as he runs multiple times to you and shanks you good. This unlocks a cool final phase of Final Girl, where there's no more random terror flips that do anything, so you can completely predict his moves in the climactic endgame. But there's still a great twist where dying doesn't necessarily mean you're dead in this game. Yep, so much like in a horror movie, someone maybe isn't dead when they fall over. Rather, they have some reserve health or something. The killer has a chance to have extra health, randomly chosen at the beginning of the game. So this also keeps tensions rather high late game, where you can't always be sure if burying an axe in his face is enough. You, as the final girl, also have this possibility to get up too. Man, this game can really do its cheeky, campy horror humor. And to understand this more, let's talk about the 3 locations I tried. These all feel true to what you'd expect in a B movie or kind of trolly horror book, and they all come with their own stacks of items. The most basic one, Camp Happy Trails. This is, yay, a summer camp where teenagers are frolicking around a lake. Look, there's even a makeout point behind the cliffs. Horny summer camp is vanilla with no special rules, but still has flavor. You can get keys to the boat to sail across the lake. Wow, that's incredible flexibility to go coast to coast saving victims. Or for the actual lake space, victims can drown there. Okay, let's ignore that. When searching, you can find archery bows kids probably use for practice on each other, and there's a bear trap that is going to be catching humans. And gosh, those teenagers feel so annoying when they're too cool to be rescued sometimes. There's also Maple Lane, a quiet Midwestern suburb. So victims are sometimes in their houses here, and you need to tell them to escape, but they're not gonna let a random girl in, right? This is where the convince card is used to enter people's homes, so you have to plan around buying that. Plus, houses can only be searched once, but there's way more search locations to find your Bibles and crucifixes. Oh yeah, there's also your boyfriend's house, meaning that he can save your life, which actually might be okay because he's clingy and hilariously wastes your time when standing next to you. Or maybe someone left on the stove and there's a house fire that kills him before that. On the other side of the world, we have the frigid station 2891. But this has the indoor station and outside area, which you need to go through to get to the helicopter, which is the only way of leaving. So only 3 victims can get to the chopper at a time, and then you have to yell at them to fly faster through a card. Or maybe a comm specialist will come up through an event and give you a chance to hurry it up too. Also, being outside sucks here, because you and your victims can randomly get hit by frostbite, which can do later damage unless you go inside. Good thing the killer isn't immune to the sub-zero temperatures. And if you're feeling cold, you can heat things up through a flamethrower, which can do an insane amount of damage to burn the killer to a crisp. And you can get many helpful doggo that perform self-defense if the killer comes to you. So we didn't mention the killers much yet, only the generic one Hans, so let's talk about the others, starting with Dr. Fright, who has really cool killer design. He literally haunts you in your dreams, because if you fall asleep through his abilities or by resting, he puts you in the boiler room, which is a once per round minigame to reveal a side of a card underneath, and if you see him peeking out, he gets a free attack on you. Plus, victims will not follow you when you're asleep. Oh, also, he and you cannot attack each other on the map unless you're asleep, so you have some type of immunity until you're asleep. Then he can do tons of damage. Dr. Fright forces you to play the game with 2 stages of mind, and the option to voluntarily move more cards in the boiler room on your turn to quickly wake up allows for more control. Just don't take too long against Dr. Fright, since you almost always can get to a state of perma-sleep in late game where the boiler room might resolve twice a turn. Peekaboo! The other one is the Organism, which is not just one killer, but maybe up to 3. See, this killer is its own scenario design, where 3 victims on the board are the infected, meaning they could be the killer. You just have to get them test samples somehow, and once you treat them, there is a 1 in 3 chance they're the actual killer. If they are, you reveal their true identity, and that killer goes bananas catching up with all the saved up bloodlust. And then there's 2 other victims around the board that can still turn into killers. This killer does a good job of making you feel paranoid, escorting around the infected that are likely to turn. Each killer has 3 final forms, which I won't spoil, 3 dark powers, which are like huge buffs for itself, and then there's about 2 minor dark powers hidden within the Terror deck. So all those card variations with the different maps possible provides insane modular replayability. Okay, that's a lot of numbers and cards, but how much replayability is there in practice? Well, each box has 2 of these secret unlockables that you can only open once you've beat the game with their corresponding girl. I've opened 4 of them and they do make subsequent playthroughs different. So if you're the type to just churn through new content really hard, I would say you have at least 4 plays with every feature film because you can play each girl twice. We found the replayability to work really well with multiple games in a sitting. You can easily run back games by getting a new setup, starting events, and switching out your starting piles of items, of which all drastically change the opening. Then you have all the tarot cards, which are mostly unique, and there's a few copies to make it feel like the bosses are rarely doing the same exact thing. And of course, you can switch out your girl. Or you can use the extreme horror mode for less of everything that's good for you. I guess you're a masochist. The girls are also pretty cool in their asymmetry, with unique fronts and backs. It'll take a little bit of time to get used to the front and how to sequence it for the most efficiency for whatever strategy you're doing. You should really get to some girls' final forms faster than others. The girls from the station have lots of ways to get guards and retaliates, and Yuki is tough as nails with getting free cards when flipped. My favorite is definitely Raiko, since she can jump to the killer for free, so I feel like a superhero late game. And yes, Final Girl runs very true to time at 20 to 60 minutes. It's tight. You have 10 tarot cards, so 10 turns. Then the boss unleashes its final form and goes pure manhunt on you, so then you have to end the game quickly. I've seen a couple games run a little bit over an hour, usually first games of a new box, or if I decide to think extra hard. The final pro is that Final Girl is a really good playground to just make all these campy horror stories happen. There's just so many areas where theme meets gameplay. Like, the killer can sometimes stand in place to mutilate himself, which terrifies people, which raises horror. You can even panic from it too. Or maybe the killer is secretly destroying the biological tests around the map, killing a victim along with it. Let's highlight some actions. Walking is a much safer play than sprinting with less upside, and messing up on any hit can lose your turn. Landing a stronger attack reduces horror as you feel good, and you get terrified if you fail such an attack you put so much effort in. Here's some fantastic scenarios where it all came together. On Maple Lane, other neighbors were like, "Hey, what the heck is going on over there?" Combined with it being the 4th of July. So they decided to have a block party for some reason. So I was like, oh my gosh, frickin' A, the game is gonna be feasting time for Dr. Fright. But actually, what do you know? Officer Kampf is on the scene with his squad car. "Don't worry everyone, I'm here to save you." And then he slowly moved all the panicked and confused victims from their block party towards me. Or in this frigid hellhole, I was about to save so many victims when a snowstorm suddenly hit, meaning that my movement outside was random. Yeah, I'm not risking being stuck outside with frostbite. So I went back to the lab through an entrance that happened after an earlier explosion, where my comm specialist was awaiting orders, but now no more need for him. I personally yelled directed victims to safe locations with my 2-way radio you start with. Then I went to go search for a flare gun to try to shoot down the recently spawned and confused organism. I wasn't too concerned about not being able to save victims because I was eating with the cook in the kitchen earlier, so that horror was really low. The way you bind resolve action cards also feels like it mirrors the beats of a horror movie too. Since there's only one of the good attacks, you have to do some biting, attacking, and then running away from the killer, just like what they do in a horror movie. And then you can find all these miscellaneous ways to interact with the killer or find ways to slow him down. Cons! Starting with component cons, you got these wooden markers to keep track of certain item uses. And these are a little too small. Like, come on, couldn't you have made them taller or easier to see? These definitely do not stay in their designated circle well. Then, the boards do not stay flat. This is because they're stored at a tilted angle, so when playing, you can't really get it to stay flat, meaning they're weirdly stick out in front of your item area. You can really bend the player boards to stay flat, but then you'll have to fold them back once you put the game away. Your mileage may vary here, I guess, but ours is still kind of sticking up no matter what we do. Oh nice, since we're already on the box issues with the boards, we can talk about this whole VHS system looking shtick. Sure, you have plenty of organization included, but since it's double-sided, you have to turn both of these over to set it up. You can't put all the components on one half of it. Plus, you gotta take stuff out of your Final Girl core box to add more time. I'm sure people probably have devised their own system to make this faster, but if you put it back like how it's initially packaged, it's just cumbersome. Plus, Final Girl is a game that doesn't take that long to play, so having a more annoying setup and takedown penalizes it further. Okay, so now onto gameplay cons, and this one falls under a big umbrella. Is that Final Girl struggles with randomness in some areas of the game. Now, before we go further, we understand that this is a zany, not meant to be taken too seriously horror movie simulator, but some of the randomness struggles lead to some hilariously punishing bad game states. Let's start with events. You start with one, and some of them can make the game so much easier, like having a friendly chef next to you, or starting with a straight up permanent buff. Or you can get star-crossed lovers that throw each other at the killer if their partner dies. Oh my goodness, thematic, but very frustrating to win that. Or how about tons of people immediately dying in a lake, which also opens up a new area for victims to panic into and die. It's here I'm gonna expose that Final Girl is a decently snowbally game. We said in the pros that yes, there are ways to get more dice to roll, which feels good, but also the opposite can happen. You can have a downward death spiral. You can have a bad starting event. Wow, this card is a permanent debuff that makes saving victims twice as hard. But this can get combined with your poor initial dice rolling. See, there's no first turn rerolls at all, and while rolling partial successes is okay, there's nothing you can do in the first round to get you over 2 blanks in a row. And sure, you can buy rerolls later, but that's spending precious time to do so, when you're already getting punished on time for failing your roll. And this is not good for the newcomer experience, because it's totally possible you could play the game with below average rolls and then combined with super unlucky event cards. This will make you all get utterly steamrolled, and then a newcomer is like, what the heck did I just play? What? In Camp Happy Trails, you know the box that comes in the starter set? This box really punishes you for weird openings. This is because Hans has 12 HP, which is higher than the other killers, and there's not any inherent ways on the map to slow him down if he's ahead. Getting a good weapon is really useful for getting the HP down for Hans, and if you don't find one early to mid game in your efforts to search, you can get to late game and just not have enough firepower. Let's bring up others. Dr. Fright has a minor dark power that literally permanently puts you to sleep. AKA, he puts you in a continually resetting boiler room for chances of additional free attacks for the rest of the game, and victims refuse to follow you because you're asleep. So you can't save victims to get those benefits, and then you can't flip your Final Girl card. Goodbye, tons of beneficial stuff for you. There's only one card to get rid of minor dark powers I've seen after my dozen plays, and that's not in Dr. Fright's map. The whole removal of victim saving is also at the station, because you can flip over the snowstorm early, essentially blocking off your way of rescuing victims, and then the way the infected work out here is that maybe there's 3 killers instead of 1, they eat all of the victims. About less than half of the events from each location are strictly bad for you, just don't hope you get them all in a row. It's pretty safe to say that Final Girl is one of those solo games where if you feel like you're insanely behind early or mid game, you should just restart, unless you're a masochist. Like sure, there's things you can learn to increase your win rate as you get more experienced, like having close call or improvisation before doing big checks, but the game can essentially be over before you get to a point where randomness mitigation matters. I'm genuinely shocked that they allowed so many ridiculously bad board states to happen in the beginning of the game, but I guess the game just decided to double down on the ameritrash feeling and say, hey, if you're gonna have some bad games, so be it. It's not really bad thematically though, right? And I do understand this to a point, because how the heck do you even balance a system with so many different items, insanely swingy events and tarot cards, and swingy dice rolls where it's thematic to fail them? So again, this con isn't weighted as badly as with most games, where part of the fun is seeing how tragically you die. But some simple fixes to this could be preventing the minor dark powers from being drawn in the first couple cards of the terror deck, or letting players have a once per game reroll. Or you could discard any 2 cards to reroll anytime. Scoring! Now it's time for a recommender score on Final Girl, where we try to critically evaluate the pros and cons, with the caveat of whether or not this is a good idea in the first place. And I don't have the complete picture here of every single set. I only have the starter set plus these 2 other ones due to info from our patrons. Anyways, this Final Girl system with this information I have is gonna be a 8 out of 10. It is great. Yeah, Final Girl is a modernized ameritrash game where it's just silly, goofy stuff happening with a creepy horror killer around. And then there's a lot of dice chucking. The juice comes from managing all the different tracks in the game and then your hand of cards, and even your health is one of these, where being low on health is good and that final health might not actually be your final health. There's definitely a bit of a learning curve at first about when to buy each card and when to flip over your Final Girl, but when this clicks, you'll start to see so many familiar horror movie beats happen. And just like watching these silly movies, you can't take this game too seriously. And this game is not at all for those who hate dice rolling output randomness. Like, don't even get me started about the time I rolled 3 dice, got all blanks, and then played close call to reroll all of them, and then I got all blanks again. Like, yeah, that can happen, but then a secret tunnel can pop up. Wow, that's really good. Or maybe someone will pull the fire alarm and now everyone's panicking, and that's free movement for people. Just like the Lovecraftian Eldritch Horror and Mansions of Madness, horror is still one of the best playgrounds for these unlucky outcomes. There can be a certain enjoyment out of heroically dying at the last minute and using cool items in dumb scenarios, just cuz. There's no high score to achieve in Final Girl, it's just kill or get killed and tell the best brutal stories. Oh, you thought you were losing, but then you can use your lucky dice to roll 6 dice to sprint and then launch a weak attack. If that attack misses, you'll die from the damage. To demonstrate the casual mindset again, there's 3 tiebreakers for when you have to make a decision for the game. They're the worst for you, the most realistic, or the funniest. What does the most realistic or funniest mean in an already silly world? Who knows? You figure it out. The recommended score would have been a 9 out of 10 if not for the inconvenient bad openings the game can infamously provide. But there's definitely enough going on with the systems that as you get better, you'll see your win rate go up. I know it definitely did for me. Here's a way that I took from BGG to thematically explain the bad openings this game can give you. It is, you are actually not the final girl. You're playing as a paranoid, maybe slightly narcissistic girl that thinks the killer is out to get her. So she thinks she is the final girl. So sometimes, yes, you are the final girl who can do the killing blow, but sometimes your girl is just a side character that gets obliterated before she can put up a decent fight. Anyways, Final Girl is one of those experiences where your enjoyment is probably fully realized after the 4th game or so to understand the core systems. After that, there's still so much novelty to see with all the feature film boxes. If you just get the starter set for 50 bucks, this is like around an expensive 7 out of 10 recommender score. It's still good to buy, but it's not the way to keep playing Final Girl given that there's so many other interesting stories to tell and you can mix and match stuff. If you're really practiced in games and or on a budget, you can totally skip Camp Happy Trails. Then out of the other 2 I've tried, get Maple Lane first. Dr. Fright feels like way more of an actual killer than the organism. And I know you guys are gonna ask me in the comments, how does this compare to this other popular horror solo game? Let's explain a little bit here. Arkham Horror LCG is more of a lifestyle experience with constantly thinking how to deck build differently. Then while playing, you draw off your deck and other randomization is done through this bag. Final Girl is the epitome of improvising to grab a girl you like and hop in, with dice chucking for every single card played. The way these 2 games tell stories is much different too. Arkham Horror is about being led down specific story points with multiple monsters, where you'll read something key to the scenario and have to consider that when making decisions. Final Girl only has that flavor text, but is more of a roguelite and providing a commonly used trope map full of screaming victims while you and the killer dance around each other. Both are awesome games to get, and if you want something more investigator-y and otherworldly, get Arkham Horror, especially if you're looking for 2+ players potential. My personal score for Final Girl is going to be a 7 out of 10. And shout out to our patron, our Mad Lad patron Fodder, for predicting that I would rate it a 7 out of 10 after he recommended me to play the game. Some more elaboration on this, Final Girl for me is best when the killer feels at least somewhat scary. This means that you're not doing too well, but then if you're doing too poorly due to some whack rolls or whack events, then it feels so hopeless, it's not that fun either. So the game peaks for me at an 8 out of 10, and is at lowest like a 5 out of 10, and with the cool theme, I happily bump it up to a 7 out of 10 overall. I actually didn't like Final Girl that much when I first played, but then I realized that saving victims feels amazing when you're getting perks for combo-y turns. And then when I found Raiko, who can literally jump to the killer, I found that so satisfying to end games with. I really feel like I'm a changed woman when I flip over the Final Girl card, killer, I'm coming for you. That being said, my favorite killer map by far is Dr. Fright on Maple Lane. Having him haunt people's dreams with his vivid art is spooky enough for me, and being put in the boiler room and then having to escape by doing this mini game of guessing what side he's on was surprisingly very fun. It was like every time I moved the card, I would be scared to see him peeking out of the corner. Ah, he got me. And then pleading people to let you in their house so you can take their stuff is such a funny image. Like, can you imagine that you wake up in the middle of the night to hear a random girl pounding on your door saying there's a killer on the loose? The whole officer cough shepherding victims across the map while it's the 4th of July is still one of the funniest moments in solo board gaming for me. If you are scared, I would be happy to escort you out of the area. Obviously, we've got to talk about the mechanics, and the hand management comes together very well throughout the game. I'm always planning 1 to 2 turns ahead, and I've played so much that the cards all feel like old friends in some weird comforting way when I get them. But I do wish they had art on them, at least something for how often you're using them. Anyways, finding ways to save or bump up time to buy favorite cards is so satisfying. And as I got better at managing terror, having more dice be readily accessible to me made dice chucking more fun. My other favorite parts include searching for items in a new location, using said fun items, and flipping over events to see what happens, which should show you that I'm mostly playing this for novelty and story. But however, after 4 times on each map, you begin to see the events and items start repeating, so I need more boxes, I think, soon. And if I were to play again with my current components, I would go back to Dr. Fright on Maple Lane and just try every single character on that map with their unlockables. That was it, Final Girl. This was a long time coming, but really wanted to get it out before Halloween. Fun stuff this game was. I can understand the hype. Yeah, let me know what you think of this game. We will be getting that John Company review out for you guys. We just got so many projects going. It's been a big rush of things to end the year with. Yeah. Anyways, thank you to our patrons for making videos like this possible. Again, we got some patrons helping me to suggest this game and what box to pick. Shout out to Fodder for that. Fodder, you're also over here in our Man That's a Cardboard. Whew, okay, anyways, see you guys later. Let me know what you think. Maybe you can suggest one of the best. Let me know what you think. Maybe you could suggest one of the best feature films to try. Anyways, bye-bye.